This is Talk Business and Politics with Roby Brock.
And welcome to the program. As always, we appreciate you tuning in. It was a busy week in Washington and across the state and nation. Hillary Clinton becoming the presumptive Democratic nominee for president. It is all but certain that she and Donald Trump, the GOP leader, will square off this fall. I caught up with 3rd District Congressman Steve Womack in Washington a few days ago to get his take on this history-making election and other important issues. We are visiting on Wednesday, the day after Hillary Clinton, the former First Lady of Arkansas, has clinched the presumptive nomination for the Democratic Party's presidential race. Partisan politics aside, what do you make of the historic nature, the statement of this event?
Well, you know, I congratulate the former Secretary of State for breaking through kind of that glass ceiling. Obviously, we have our political differences, and we'd like to see different outcomes in the November election, but she should be congratulated for a distinguished career in serving her country, and November election should be an interesting outcome.
Well, you're a Republican. I'm going to go ahead and presume that you are supporting Donald Trump, the GOP nominee. Are you proud that he's the GOP nominee? What's your take on Mr. Trump as the presidential nominee for the Republicans? Are you 100% with him?
Well, like a lot of my colleagues, I have said early on in the presidential race during the primary that I would support the eventual nominee, and that has not changed. I do think that despite some of the differences I might have with Mr. Trump, and we have a few, that I do think that the alternative is not in the best interest of our country. So my hope is that we can settle some of our differences, and Mr. Trump's rhetoric can be directed more toward the substantive issues facing our country and a little less about some of the angst or some of the division that is created when people talk about you know, the ethnicity of certain federal judges and their ability to adjudicate from the bench without, you know, in an objective way. I just don't think that's who we are as Americans, and that's the latest difference that I would have with the presumptive nominee. And, you know, yesterday I thought his victory speech was right on cue, and as Reince Priebus said, it was well delivered. That's the type of candidate that I have pledged to support, and that's the one that I hope we'll see more of in the ensuing days.
Well, last question on this subject. I do want to get your reaction to his comments about Judge Curiel. There you have a large Latino population in the 3rd Congressional District, particularly up in Washington and Benton counties. And I'd just like to hear what you thought of that comment and maybe what you would like to say to the Latino community in your district.
Well, first of all, it really doesn't make any difference whether a member of Congress represents an area with a significant population of minorities or not. It's not who we are. I disagree with the content, and I disagree with the demeanor in which Mr. Trump made those assertions about Judge Curiel. And look, here's maybe the most important part of it all. You know, Mr. Trump will have to account for what is in his heart about whether he has a prejudice in his heart. That's not for me to judge. But the other thing is, Roby, these kinds of comments have a way of taking the public's attention away from the major issues affecting our country: the debt, the deficit, national security, the need to deal with reforms in our entitlement programs, the things that are the hyper-regulatory environment that we're in. These are the kinds of things that are crippling our nation. And so to go off the reservation and do the kinds of things a la the comments about Judge Curiel, I think serve to deflect the public's attention away from the more substantive issues of the day. That's where we need to come back to. That's what I'm hoping happens in the weeks ahead of the general election.
Appreciate your comments on that. Let's switch to something happening here at the state level that has a federal effect here. Governor Asa Hutchinson has talked recently about wanting to close this internet tax loophole. Your Main Street tax fairness bill basically is what he said he supports in an effort to reduce income taxes here in the state of Arkansas. This has to be addressed at the federal level if it's going to be done. Give me an update on where we are with that piece of legislation that you've championed, and what do you think its chances are in this Congress?
Well, as you know, the Supreme Court in 1992 opined that not whether or not these use taxes were legal or not, they just opined that the states do not have the ability or the power to compel an out-of-state retailer without physical nexus in the state to collect and remit those taxes back to the state like our local retailers have to do. So it's an unlevel playing field. And our local retailers are hurting over it. They've become glorified showrooms to the online sellers that are not operating in our state. So I support Governor Hutchinson in his assertion that anything that we can do to fix this loophole is good for our local retailers, it's good for our cities, our counties, and our state budgets, and it will help us reduce the income tax burden on all Arkansans by taking the windfall pursuant to the legislation passed by the Arkansas General Assembly and giving everybody a tax cut on their state income tax. We already know that the surrounding states are more competitive from a state income tax perspective than Arkansas is. And so I think you've got a win-win situation going on here. Help your local retailers, help your local governments, and at the same time, give everybody a tax cut on the income tax. And I can't wait to see us do something about that in Congress. The problem is that it's stuck in the Judiciary Committee right now. We're waiting on Chairman Goodlatte to mark up some legislation that gives us a path forward to make this a reality. That hasn't happened yet. So my guess is, and I'm only speculating, that it would probably come from the Senate first if it's going to be done in this Congress. But we'll see in the next few weeks.
All right, thank you for that update. This got a little lost in the shuffle with all the presidential politics this last week, but House Speaker Paul Ryan rolled out the first plank of a GOP agenda for dealing with anti-poverty measures, anti-poverty legislation. According to some of the reports I read, the plan lacked a little bit of specifics. Can you tell me what you'd like to see in terms of specifics for some sort of welfare reform, entitlement reform that deals with poverty legislation?
Well, look, I think the first thing you have to do is you have to incentivize people that are subject to the poverty conditions that plague our country. And oh, by the way, we've been dealing with this for 50 years. We have spent hundreds of billions of dollars trying to lift ourselves out of poverty. And if you look at the percentage of people in poverty today versus 50 years ago, we're not any better off. In fact, I think we're a little worse off. There's a significant percentage of people living in poverty. And I think the first thing you have to do is you have to take the programs that you're paying for today and incentivize people, first of all, to work. If they're able-bodied people without dependents, we ought to have a provision in there that allows people to work and to be incentivized because I think it does a lot of things that helps people enjoy the productivity of life, so to speak. And then the other things that you got to do, you got to make it accountable. You got to tailor your programs like your education and your career technical programs to meet the needs of the people. What we have in Washington, over 50 years, we've developed a stovepipe kind of system here where there's a lack of accountability and we're just throwing more money at the problem. So I think what Paul has done is he's laid out kind of a conceptual idea of what the specifics will be sheltered under when they are released, and that's incentivize people to work, demand accountability, the career and technical education pieces, and doing the things necessary to make sure that people are accountable and helping themselves up out of this poverty condition. That's what the anti-poverty campaign is about, and it's not about just throwing more money at the problem.